What's up, my comic comrades? Today we return to covering one of our favorite type of characters, pulp heroes and characters from comics. We've already covered pulp icons like the Shadow, the Phantom, Dick Tracy, and Green Hornet, all of which you could find right here. The Spirit is yet another awesome character from the world of pulp magazines and comics that doesn't nearly get enough spotlight, so today we're giving him some love. So if you love the character, it should be fun to revisit some of your favorite things about him, and if you don't know much about him, prepare to learn about a dope character. With that said, let's get into it. The Spirit first appeared in the Register and Tribune Syndicate in June 1940. He was created by the one and only Will Eisner. You know, the iconic cartoonist who has the most prestigious comic book award named after him, as in the Eisner Award? Yeah. That dude created the Spirit. The Spirit is the creation of Will Eisner's legendary newspaper, and in the character's first appearance in the Register and Tribune Syndicate, he appeared as a main feature in a 16-page tabloid-sized newsprint comic book insert in the Sunday edition of the Register and Tribune Syndicate. It was subsequently carried by 20 different Sunday newspapers, getting a combined circulation of 5 million copies during the 40s. It became such a popular comic strip that people called it the Spirit section of the newspaper, and it lasted this way until 1952. The success of Will Eisner's The Spirit would essentially lead it to not just being published in newspapers, but eventually being a full-blown comic book, published by such publishers as Quality Comics, Harvey Comics, IDW, and more, but we'll get a little more in depth with that a little later. As for now, let's get into the fictional origin of the Spirit. Alright, so Will Eisner's original comic book strip would be reprinted in Will Eisner's Spirit Archives by DC Comics in 2000, and it's in his very first appearance we would get his origin. Anyone who reads comic books knows that's not always the case. It's very 50-50. A lot of the time, we don't get a character's origin until several issues down the line. In any case, in the Spirit's very first appearance in the story simply called The Origin of the Spirit, we are introduced to Denny Colt, a private detective and criminologist. We first see him walking into his commissioner's office saying, "Commissioner Dolan, may I come in?" The commissioner answers saying, "Danny Colt, haven't I had enough trouble?" Colt responds, "Bet a nickel I know who you're thinking about." Commissioner tells him, "You're right, here's your nickel. It's Dr. Cobra." Colt says, "Thank you. So Dr. Cobra has escaped again. Why don't you build stronger jails?" Colt continues to say, "Oh, well, I suppose Denny Colt, criminologist and private detective, will have to do again." Then he tries to tell him he knows where Dr. Cobra is. The commissioner then pushes him out the office saying, "Then what are you standing here for?" And with that, Colt leaves the office to track down Dr. Cobra. We then see Colt finally arrive at the location of Dr. Cobra, which is somewhere in the crooked, narrow alleys in the dark heart of Chinatown. We see Dr. Cobra working on some sort of evil concoction, with Colt pointing a gun at him, saying, "The game's up, Dr. Cobra. I'm taking you in." Cobra then looks at him saying, "Denny Colt, somehow the police are always interfering with my experiments. Someday they will bow down before me." As one of Dr. Cobra's men starts attacking Colt with a knife, but he gives him a left hook, knocking him down. Dr. Cobra then uses a distraction to attack Colt, causing Colt to accidentally fire off a shot into the vat of liquid containing whatever Dr. Cobra was working on. This liquid then pours all over Colt. As the comic says, drenched in the liquid, he sinks to the floor. And Dr. Cobra drags his aide out through a secret passage. And behind them, dimly outlined by the strange light cast by the equally strange chemical, the body of Denny Colt lies rigid, unmoving. After Dr. Cobra gets away, we see the commissioner and police arrive, where they find Colt lying in the strange liquid chemical that was created by Dr. Cobra. The commissioner then picks him up, saying, "Dead. Get the coroner." Once at the coroner's, the coroner says, "The man's dead all right. Rigor mortis has already set in. I'd call it heart failure. No serious wounds." The commissioner then says, "Heart failure don't seem right. He was a great kid. I liked him." The next day, we see his obituary printed in the newspaper saying, "Denny Colt, criminologist, killed while attempting to capture a notorious madman." We then see later that night at a cemetery someone busting out of their grave, and that someone then heads to the police headquarters in Commissioner Dolan's office. The commissioner says, "Hey, how did you get in here?" Clearly startled, with the shadow figure saying, "Keep your seat, Commissioner. I'll do the talking. Don't reach for the gun. That's right, just sit back and listen. Now there's a big reward out for the capture of Dr. Cobra. I've come to claim it. Have the money here, and I'll deliver Cobra in 3 hours." The commissioner says, "Come out of the shadows," but the person just points a gun at him saying, "And let you see my face? Hardly, but for identification, you might call me the Spirit." That's right, this is clearly Denny, who somehow came back to life busting out of his own grave. Those chemicals he was covered in obviously did something to him. Anyway, thinking the voice sounded familiar, the commissioner then goes to the coroner saying, "You sure Denny Colt was dead?" He answers, "Look here, Dolan. I've been pronouncing deaths for 20 years. I think I know a dead man when I see one." At this point, the commissioner decides to go to Wildwood Cemetery to check out Colt's grave. Meanwhile, at the cemetery, there's 2 thugs there, but the Spirit arrives pointing a gun at them, forcing them into a tomb with Commissioner Dolan watching around the corner. Once inside the tomb, the Spirit asks the thugs, "Tell me, where's Dr. Cobra hiding?" They swear they don't know, but the Spirit just grabs them by the shirt saying, "You're lying, both of you. Now listen to me, you rats. When the clock strikes midnight, this Spirit will get Dr. Cobra, wherever he is. Now beat it." As they run away with the Spirit laughing at them, the commissioner then shows him himself saying, "What's your game, Spirit?" He then turns around, revealing his face to the commissioner as Dolan says, "Denny Colt? Alive? I thought I recognized your voice back in my office. Came down here on a hunch to make sure you were dead." Colt says, "Officially, I'm dead, but really, as you see, I'm quite alive. When I tried to capture Cobra, that vat with some chemicals, it smashed. I was put in a state of suspended animation. Believing me to be dead, you fellas buried me. I came to several hours later and broke out of my grave." The commissioner asks, "But what is this spirit business?" He says, "No time for a lot of explaining. I've got work to do," as he ultimately tracks down Dr. Cobra. But when Cobra is about to stab Spirit, the commissioner shoots him in the butt, allowing the spirit to capture him, saying, "Dolan, thanks. You sure saved my life that time." He replies, "That's not much since spirits have a reputation for being immortal. But kidding aside, what are you planning to do?" He answers, "Remain dead and take up the job of being the spirit. You know, Dolan, there are criminals and crimes beyond the reach of the police, but the spirit can reach them." The commissioner asks, "But how about food, money? Where will you live?" He responds, "In the cemetery. As for money, I'll collect rewards, and the spirit will get along fine. By the way, here's my card, which we see has a tombstone on it, and it says Spirit Address, Wildwood Cemetery." And just like that, we have the origin of the spirit. It's a really fun concept and a classic detective story. Like a lot of pulp characters of his time, it's very much in line with the origins of characters like the Shadow and Green Hornet. As for story arcs, you're going to want to start from the beginning. I'm talking the original Will Eisner spirit stories that came from the newspaper and were later collected into comics and trades, such as Will Eisner's Spirit Archives, which was printed through DC Comics. This is where you'll find the original origin that we just detailed, as well as a ton of classic spirit stories like the return of Dr. Cobra from June 9th, 1940, along with the Black Queen from June 16th, 1940, and Voodoo in Manhattan, and the list goes on and on. However, this comes with a serious disclaimer, because unfortunately, when you're reading these original spirit stories from the 40s, you see the depiction of black people is horrendous and completely racist. So while these are classic stories, it is a tragic reminder of the horrific way black men and women were treated at that time, and how much they had to go through. In its own way, it's important for us to be reminded of how insane that kind of treatment of any human actually is, so we can continue to improve and keep humanity's worst impulses in check. With that in mind, we couldn't go on talking about these early spirit books without acknowledging that and how jacked up it is. Anyway, after the Will Eisner comic strips, we would get the first proper spirit comic books when Quality Comics acquired the series, and we got a 22-issue run that started in 1944. It was still the classic spirit we've all come to love at that point, just now an actual comic book, rather than newspaper comic strips that were translated into comic books later on. It's a staple series for the character that only cemented him as one of the best comic book creations of its time, and really of all time. I mean, the spirit was clearly one of the main inspirations for characters like The Question and Rorschach. Nonetheless, by the time 1952 rolled around, Fiction House would publish the Spirit comic, which was very short-lived. But nonetheless, it was still The Spirit by Will Eisner in comic book form, giving us the staples we've come to love, like Denny Colt, aka The Spirit, working alongside Commissioner Dolan. Then in 1966, Harvey Comics would publish Will Eisner's The Spirit. The Harvey Comics series from '66 would actually give us a retelling of the Spirit's origin that was still very close to the original one given to us by Will Eisner in 1940. As you can see in the issue, Denny Colt tracks down Dr. Cobra, and in the ensuing battle, the chemicals spill all over him, putting him in suspended animation. They think he's dead, bury him, but he comes back to life. Once again, he seeks revenge on Dr. Cobra, takes him down, and then becomes a spirit, taking on crime in a way that the police can't. Then jumping forward a bit, we would go to 1998, where we would get The Spirit, The New Adventures, published through Kitchen Sink Press. It was written by the one and only Alan Moore and drawn by the great Dave Gibbons, with some of the original art of Will Eisner worked in. It was an 8-issue series that reinvented the Spirit for the new generation. Yes, it retells his origin, expanding upon it yet again, just like Harvey Comics did. But decades had passed since that series, and this was literally reintroducing the Spirit to a modern generation. And I gotta say, it's pretty damn good. But I would expect nothing less from the same creative team that gave us the freaking Watchmen. You heard me correctly. If you didn't catch on, like I said earlier, it's written by Alan Moore and drawn by Dave Gibbons. The same exact team that brought us The Watchmen, one of the most iconic and beloved comic books of all time. But guess what? The Spirit would stay in very capable hands, as when 2007 came around, DC Comics was now publishing the character and gave it to writer-artist Darren Cook, one of the best ever to write or draw a comic book. Now, if you're a real comic book fan, you know Darwin Cook's art is something to behold. It has such a timeless, classic feel that fits perfectly for pulp icon characters like the Spirit. And Cook knocked it out of the park with this 22-issue series. It just feels like you're reading a classic cartoon. It's so good. Initially, the series focused on a young TV news journalist who was abducted on air moments before having to speak with a mob informant, at which point the Spirit has to rush in to save her. It's your classic detective versus mobster type story, and because of that, it's really good. That's why there's the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the last Spirit title we're going to talk about is Will Eisner's The Spirit, The Corpse Makers, published in 2017 by Dynamite Publications. That's right, it seems like every new Spirit series gets done by a different publisher. Guy's a man whore, what can I say? In any case, this 5-issue series centers around a series of unexpected deaths and disappearances in Central City. And no, not the same Central City as Barry Allen Flash. In any case, of course, all these missing people and deaths alert the attention of the Spirit, who arrives on the scene to solve the case. With that said, I do want to touch on where the Spirit fights crime because every hero has their home city. Superman has Metropolis, Batman has Gotham, most of Marvel characters have New York, Green Arrow has Star City, and so on and so forth. But as for the Spirit, originally, like most comic book characters, he started fighting crime in New York City, but then eventually moved to Central City, and ultimately started fighting crime all around the world. Just thought I should touch on that for anyone wondering, but let's move on to powers and abilities. Now, this is going to be extremely easy because the Spirit doesn't have any superpowers at all. And on top of that, he also doesn't have special training. Essentially, any of the best detectives at your local police department could be the Spirit. With that said, he is an excellent fighter and a great detective, but again, nothing on the superhuman level, just very proficient. You see, the thing that makes the Spirit so unique is unlike most comic book characters, he is written very realistically, without a ton of outlandish instances that wouldn't happen in real life. So it's grounded in reality, minus the fact that he's basically immortal due to that liquid that spilled on him by Dr. Cobra. It slowed down his aging process, but besides that, the fighting and overall action in the book are very much grounded in the real world. So unfortunately, there's not much to say in the sense of powers and abilities. He's just an excellent fighter and detective, and as for equipment and weapons, just like any detective, he carries a gun. Now with that said, let's give you guys some Spirit reading recommendations. Check out the original Spirit strips by Will Eisner in the Spirit Archives, The Spirit from Harvey Comics, The Spirit The New Adventures, Darwin Cook's Spirit, and Will Eisner's The Spirit The Corpse Makers. And the last one isn't a reading recommendation, but check out the Spirit live action film from 2008, written and directed by Frank Miller. Yeah, that's right, we didn't forget about the Spirit's live action film. Now given, it's not the best movie, but it's still fun nonetheless. Also, Samuel L. Jackson plays the villain, the Octopus, so it's worth a watch for him alone. The Octopus is a character in the Spirit comics that never revealed his face, but readers could easily recognize him by his unique purple gloves he constantly wore. That combined with the skill for disguise made the Octopus a significant figure in the Spirit series. But there you have it, friends, a history of the Spirit, a character we think is pretty dope, and hopefully you see why. With that said, let us know in the comments section below what you think of the Spirit and any other history suggestions you have for pulp heroes. Otherwise, we'll see you next time when I talk about all things comics.